Hi everyone, my name is Jacob Rohter, and next we're going to be talking about adding and tracking sites within the Brownfields inventory tool. Very briefly, before we get into the what this tool does and how it does those things, I thought it might be useful to take one step back and talk about the why this matters. Solid record keeping is a really critical part of Brownfields project success stories. Any Brownfields person that has a lot of experience will probably agree with you on this point. These projects can take a lot of time. Sometimes during that time, people can change roles, projects might overlap or get paused, and sometimes you might be managing multiple sites while also trying to remember where that one report was or which parcel number that was associated with or what the owner's name was and all those type of things. Keeping clean, consistent site records can save you a lot of time and energy digging through old emails, searching for mystery PDFs, and it just makes it faster and easier to pull up what you need and when you need it. For those folks who are new to brownfields, welcome, and I think this is one of the best habits you can build early in your brownfields career. It keeps your workload manageable and also keeps your projects coherent even as they continue to move forward and evolve. The good news is that the BiT tool is designed to be very simple and self-explanatory. The tutorial I'm about to walk through is generally straightforward on purpose. That's part of the design. Once you see the structure, I think it will make sense and click intuitively. So with that in mind, let's jump in and we'll start by setting up a site record to make your life easier for you and potentially for someone else who might take over the project down the road. To get started, we're going to go over here on the left sidebar. We're going to click Site. We're going to say Set up a new site. This gives us the blank form and kind of the basic dashboard for starting with a site. I'm going to go ahead and enter some information, and then we'll look at what a populated sheet looks like, and then we'll figure out the steps to get to that. Here, I've gone and I've entered the site name. I've also given the site a status. So for this one, let's say it's in the assessment phase. We've also picked through the various options. This is a junkyard, and that is already pre-categorized for you. Although if it's an unusual type of site beyond the typical brownfields things, you can also enter a custom description in the comments tab. Here I entered the name. This one's owned by Old McDonald. And we've also come up with an address based on where the pin was that Cynthia showed you in the mapping section. Here on the right, you can see where I've uploaded an image of the site using this button. And this would be a site document. It could be a phase 1 report, it could be a relevant market analysis, or maybe a developer related document. You just click over here on the uploads document and you can upload as many files as you need to, and those are stored in the cloud within your account. So again, they are privileged to you and only with people you choose to share with. Now let's go a little bit deeper into what the actual site information options are. Over here, we can look at some site details. You can also give the site an alias. So for example, if it operated under a different name at a different period of time, or if it's locally known as something beyond what you want to call it, you can call it that. You can also enter address information. Again, this is populated from the pin on the map. If you move the pin, it will change the address, so just be aware of that. You can also enter the address and it will put the pin automatically on the map. Sometimes these sites can have complicated addresses. You can also think about keeping the mailing address separate in a different field if you want the official address versus where the site's actually located. Here we have the latitude, longitude in decimal degrees. That's the easiest format to deal with latitude and longitude. You can copy and paste those directly. They're also up here on the top. Here we have acres property ID. That's information that will help you if you're tracking within the EPA system as well. Here we have various methods of keeping track of what you're using for the address or what you're using as you're more and more specific. Some of these things can be fairly nuanced. You don't necessarily need to fill them all out right away, but as you go with time, you'll start to see the reasons why these things can be relevant to your project. Here we can enter things like the site size in acres. Let's say this was 10-acre site. That's a rather large one by some measures. Other measures, that might be a fairly small site. Brownfields can be anywhere from something like a quarter-acre gas station to hundreds or even thousands of acres sometimes on former industrial sites. Here's also more information on reference points. So if you don't exactly know the address, but you want to describe it relationally to something else, here's some places where you can store that information as well. Also, if it's located in a special district like an economic development incentive zone, or if you want to enter zoning information, things like that, these are all fields that you can fill in. There's room for where you want to put assessed value, whether like the property is well situated with community planning or whether it needs some more deeper level thought. Other information that's useful, a lot of times these properties may have back taxes owed on them, sometimes due to defunct or complicated ownership situations, and also whether there's available local funding. And this is also a good place to put whether there's a history of what the past use was or what the past ownership, anything that might be useful for people to save on doing the research multiple times to find the same answers. One of the other things that I think is overlooked a lot is that putting in actual directions to the site. Sometimes Google Maps doesn't take you there. Sometimes you want a more local set of directions. Here I went ahead and made up a description that might fit the old style. You'll notice there's also check boxes here that you can click to remind yourself whether you have, for example, videos of walking around the property or photos from the property or documents. Those can help if you have multiple sites. Keeping here, you can see space where you can enter information like parcel allotment numbers, census tracts, or divide up the prominent past use in either acres or square feet, or the legal description if you have one. You may not have all this information right now, but you can enter it over time, or it's great to enter it if you know it. Now we've scrolled back up here, and we're going to look at the ownership section. Here I've entered the name of the owner. You can enter a description of the ownership entity. You can also describe their relationship to the property, so we'll call this one the previous owner. You can describe the land ownership status, and you can also note whether that's changed over the life of the project. If it did change, one thing to note is whether they qualified for liability exemptions for the owner that's described. Sometimes these things fit better in words than they do in a checkbox, so here I entered some information about why the ownership might be complicated. And down below, I've also kept an area for entering the mailing address to contact the owner, which might be separate from the actual property address, and a phone number can be worth a lot. So I'm going to remember to hit save, and then we're going to go ahead and check those two boxes since we've done those. And we'll take a brief look at here. You can enter more comments because obviously these projects can have many sources of complication. They don't all fit neatly in a checkbox. So that's why we entered some more information there about the pending transaction. Over here real quick, we'll just do a quick demo of what uploading images and documents looks like. You can drag and drop, or you can also select from within your computer. It's pretty easy. And think of this like a digital binder rather than keeping files all over the place. You can keep them in one place that it's easier to keep track of. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the site assessment and reuse planning. This is the area where you're going to document what's been done on the site, what contaminants might be present, and any key reuse activities. So things like whether the cleanup is required or if it may be unknown. That sometimes these projects are early in a stage and there's a lot of unknowns. There's also a section here that describes involvement with the state or tribal brownfields or voluntary response program. So if it's enrolled in a program, sometimes keeping their case number or a note of reference for when you're dealing with the state programs can be an easy way to keep track of that. Sometimes there's a description of what the current status is and what might be happening next. And then also a date of enrollment can be useful as well. We're going to go ahead and click save, and we're going to check the box there, and we're going to move on to contamination info. These kind of drop downs, they can give you a list of many of the common contaminants. There's also areas where you can enter about insufficient information or things that are not on the list. When we're talking about media affected, that talks about the difference between groundwater, drinking water, and also the various potential receptors and target pathways and the ways that they can be transmitted. Since we've looked at that, we're going to click the box, we're going to click save. We're going to move on to cultural historical information. So if If it has a historical site name, you can enter it there. If it's had a historical survey date, we can enter it there. If there's a site description, survey findings, those can be very important for historic tax credits to make projects pencil out, so don't overlook that. And it also gives you room to enter information about who conducted the survey. Overall, this really helps just keep all the assessment and the reuse planning progress transparent and also easy to update. Things can change over time. Since we've looked at that, we're going to hit save. We're going to check the box. We're going to move on. Before moving on to the open dump survey, I want to touch on a few more categories without going too far into the details, but to show the breadth of what you can enter. We're going to go ahead and we'll start with the sampling. These will really be useful once you get into the cleanup, controls, redevelopment, and occasionally complaints as well. These help you understand the full life cycle of a site. Starting with sampling data, we'll go ahead, we'll just create a default record. Basically, this tool gives you a place to summarize your sampling data. So if you're new to brownfields, sampling is basically how you figure out what you're dealing with contamination-wise and how that might affect the redevelopment. For more experienced folks, you already know the pain of trying to remember which PDF had the arsenic results from 2019 or where the coordinates for that one sample actually came from. This section is pretty simple, or it can be as complex as you need it to be. You enter the sample IDs, the dates, the analyses, and the results. Even if you're just putting in a brief summary, having it all in one place saves you from hunting through old emails later on, or even just leaving yourself a trail of cookie crumbs as to which file you should refer to. Cleanup details are quite similar in a way. They can be as detailed as you need it to be. Sometimes folks are still in the assessment phase, so not everybody might be at this step yet. Next up, we'll talk about institutional controls and engineering controls. These are things like deed restrictions, caps, vapor barriers, anything that has to stay in place after the cleanup to keep the site safe. This section really matters because controls follow the property, not just the project manager. So if you've ever stepped into a project where nobody knew whether a groundwater use restriction was still active, I think you'll appreciate having this recorded cleanly here. Basically, all you have to do here is note whether institutional controls are required, type, and whether they're already in place. They can be mentioned there. Let's go ahead and check those boxes, and we'll talk about redevelopment, reuse, and then we'll move on to the open dump survey. This is the part that everyone actually wants to talk about. It's the most exciting part of brownfields. But to plan it well, you really got to capture the basics, and those are here. A lot of it starts at a date, and hopefully it completes at a certain date. We like to talk about the number of jobs leveraged and the total site size that's reused, especially in acres, not just the number, but also in the acres database. That's an important note. In addition, the current zoning, any required controls, floodplains, infrastructure requirements, things like that, and whether the actual planned versus actual future use is an important delineation as well. So this is really the section that ties together the whole life cycle of your typical brownfield site. What the site used to be, what's been done, and what it's working on becoming. It can also be really helpful when you're managing multiple sites because you can quickly answer questions like just how far along are we, or what's the zoning, or what infrastructure is already there, does it have rail, does it have sewer, those kind of things, without having to dig up 6 different documents, or at the very least, you've uploaded your documents into one place. We did also add a section on resiliency strategies to talk about extreme weather events that can be useful. We also have something where you can divide up the usage as well. Basically, what we're talking about here is things like flood mitigation or extreme weather planning, climate-related considerations. It's really simple, but capturing it here helps show that the reuse plan isn't just about today, but it's more about the long-term durability of the reuse being compatible. And now we'll touch briefly on complaints. So nobody ever likes a complaint, but this is a place where you can keep a log of them so that way you can help maintain code violation records and things like that. You can also note whether who made the complaint, whether a responsible party was identified or not, things like that. Basically, if a complaint comes in, maybe about dumping or odors or access, you name it, this gives you one clean place to log it. So you can do the same for inspections and enforcement actions, which keeps you from having to dig around again in the random emails or sticky notes. I use them a lot myself, believe me, but this really does make it easier to streamline your workflow. It really helps create that clear history for your regulatory partners for your own reference when someone inevitably asks, "Has anything ever happened on this site that we should know about?" So, really, a small entry can go a long way. Next, let's switch to the Open Dump Characterization tool. So basically, this is designed for documenting illegal dump sites, and then it automatically helps you generate a health threat score based on some standardized factors. You can then take some of that information and you can plug a basic cleanup estimate of what that dump cleanup cost would be. You can note up top here that the tool has already pulled information from your various site records like the state, county, coordinates, things like that. So starting with site characteristics, there's things like surface area, the surface volume, EPA ID, picking the survey date, who the surveyor is with, land status. You can also check the various solid waste systems of um, what your disposal types might be, whether it's a C&D landfill, construction demolition debris, or whether it's a transfer site or recycling facility, things like that, and whether it's an active system or not. We'll go ahead and check that box and we'll look at some hazard factors. So in this area, we talk here about like what the actual materials are, since they all have kind of different risk levels and different procedures involved with the disposal or of a cleanup of an illegal dump. So, for example, abandoned vehicles or tires or appliance white goods, that would be like a dryer or an old refrigerator that gets dumped, things like that. You got to also have like construction debris, so just random demolition stuff, or electronics, or there might be lead acid batteries, tires, waste oil, you name it. We try to put it on there. If it's not there, you can always add a comment field. Basically, once you add all these together, you get a sub score, which kind of helps you rank if you have multiple sites to deal with. And then these also factor in various things like the rainfall level or the flooding potential of the site or whether they're burning them regularly or not. So various ways that you can expose the contaminants that would be involved with that, or how you can remove those sources of contamination by removing the illegal dump materials. And then you've also got things like public concern. So you can really just add into all these factors and get an estimate. So we go ahead and save that. And we'll check that box and we'll look at some proximity factors. So these are things like how close it might be to someone's drinking water aquifer or to their home or to say a lake that they go swimming or fishing in, things like that. Basically, all these things can combine into an overall health threat score, which can help you really just guide your cleanup priorities. If you only have limited resources, you start with the things that have the most, negative effects that are witnessed by people and wildlife and the environment. We'll take a look here at the health threat score. This is similar in a way. It's kind of a accumulation summary, and then one of the nice features there is you can generate a report. This is an example of what that report generated looks like in a Word document. It's a little more printer friendly. You can share it more easily with folks without having to have a login. So once you've got the dump survey completed, you can move on to a cost estimate. That's really a lot of what people want to know. So basically, this tool will automatically pull the data from the dump characterization and some funding activities and your resource entries. You can describe them as generically or specifically as you want. So for this one, I just use some general units of like labor hours of a volunteer match that good-natured citizens would just help out and pitch in, and then how many hours of heavy equipment, for example, specific machinery. You can, if you have many kinds of machinery and tools, you can get as specific or as general as you want to get an estimate on this. And then after that, we can kind of look at some things like the various transport costs. Some things have to go to different landfills if they're depending on their hazardous, or some things might be recyclable at a reduced rate, or perhaps they can be used as fill material if they're relatively clean, or appliances might be able to get recycled but differently than tires. So you can basically define your number of loads and your hours per load and what makes up your load, and you can figure out kind of your optimal distribution of how to most efficiently handle that, and kind of balancing it as well with like your disposal costs. really just to sort of address the wide variety of things you wind up with in a random dump situation. Overall, what most people really want to know is what's the total cleanup going to cost. And so it calculates it out there, and you can make adjustments as you need to. So, say if while you're doing your estimates, the price of steel goes up, so you can get more in the scrap value, you can recalculate it, and then this is what a report looks like when you similar to the health threat score. It's a more readable, easily shareable version of that same information. So overall, I think this tool is very helpful for planning or grant writing or prioritization of multiple sites based on finite resources and staff time, just to help rather than making your own spreadsheets and calculators. You can do it all in house here and associate with the sites. And one more final small point I want to make on this is that always look at the comment fields. If you have information but you don't know where it goes, you can always stick it in a comment field and at least it's somewhere. So overall, that's the process for adding a site, tracking assessment, and reuse planning, and then completing an open dump survey, and then finally generating a cost estimate to do the cleanup for an open dump. So I really thank you for joining this session, and if you have any questions after the webinar, always feel free to reach out to us at KSU TAB. We're always happy to help you support in your brownfields work. Thank you.